I've been, you know, I've been in Catholic. I was in Catholic school for 12 years since I was 6 years old. So that's all that spiritual training.
Are you still a Catholic?
No,
Why?
because I went to Catholic school for 12 years. People say to me, Jimmy, went to Catholic school for 12 years. How come you're not a Catholic? Says I went to Catholic school for 12 years. I had it beaten out of me by God's little helpers. I was taught by the nuns. Boy, they're a happy-go-lucky bunch, huh? Did you ever meet a nun? If that's what the joy of the Lord looks like, I'm going hookers and booze. And then after I got out of Catholic school, I started reading self-help books and things and psychology books about the inner child. John Bradshaw, who championed did a lot of pioneering work on the inner child work and how you're shame-based and guilt, and that causes it's another version of shadow work of Jung, and it's just another version of that. Show you how your negative thought patterns lead to a bunch of negative shit in your life, and how it started as your kid. What you got shamed for being who you were. You got guilted, and so now you have a guilt disorder and shame disorder, and you. So anyway, I've been doing that since I was 17, 18 years old, and reading book. I was going through all my old books. I couldn't believe all the books. I had an ex-girlfriend, not a girlfriend, an ex-friend who was a girl, very funny comedian. And she stayed at my apartment once, and she saw I had my bookcase, and it was all filled with like psychology, self-help books, all that spirituality, all that, right? And she was like, "Wow, you got a lot of self-help books." I go, "You want one?" She's like, "No, thanks." And I go, "Oh, you got everything all figured out, huh?" And I had forgotten I'd said that to her. She just called me the other day. We hadn't talked in 10 years. And she reminded me of that story, which I thought was hilarious. She goes, "I just started therapy, so I just wanted to remind you of that story." So now I think I feel driven. Like I was driven to get a Comedy Central special. I was driven, and nothing was going to keep me from it. And now I feel driven to discover what triggers me in my everyday life. What parts of my life, when is my unconscious controlling me? Because as Carl Jung says, if you don't make the unconscious conscious, it will control your life, and you will call it fate. So those unconscious part of you, the shadow controlling you, and you don't become aware of it, you're going to have negative patterns show up in your life all over, and you're going to say, "See, that's just my fate. See, this always happens to me. That's my fate." No, that's a negative pattern that you developed as a kid. And it's time to make that conscious so you can now decide whether to think that way or not. So, and by the way, I forgot to thank, remember who's the guy who sent me the Ram Dass books, and he sent me the blanket from the Guru. That blanket is on my office chair. So every time I sit down, I sit in that blanket. That was very swell of, thank you for sending that. I don't have it written down in front of me, the person's name, but we did send him a card, right? We sent everybody a card? All right. That's very sweet. Thank you for sending that. I immediately started reading that Ram Dass book. Is it there? There it is. There it is. So this is Miracle of Love, stories about Neem Karoli Baba. A man said to Maharaji, "You've promised for years to visit my home, and you have never come. I'm not going to come to see you anymore because you won't visit my home." The Maharaja said, "Oh, I didn't understand. It's your home? I had thought it was my home, and so I didn't need to visit." He's a real smartass, that Maharaji. Got a real fucking smart mouth. Anyway, it's great stuff. I love Ram Dass. The thing about Ram Dass is He's relatable. Like whenever you see these holy guys, like they're not really relatable. Like, like even Eckhart Tolle, he's you could tell he's in another consciousness. But when you listen to Ram Dass, he's just like you. He's struggling. That's how I feel about him. Right? He's just like clawing. He's still full of neuroses. He's just trying, and he's funny. Ram Dass is funny, or was. He knew how to tell a story and he knew how to tell a joke. Oh, he knew how to tell a joke. So I love listening to him. I love listening to a spiritual guy who's actually funny. He was actually funny. He didn't tell old jokes. That's a lot of those guys do that. They tell old jokes. Or someone else's jokes. Ram Dass didn't do that. He told comedy out of his own experience. It was the way he told his stories. Anyway, I can't believe I didn't frickin' meet him. So, he had a stroke towards the end of his life. Isn't it amazing, like, Ram Dass didn't live to be 110 years old? Like, all these guys. Same thing with Wayne Dyer. Wayne Dyer died at 75, 6, something like that. He was not that old. He died of a heart attack. That's not old. My dad is 91. Still alive. My dad is still alive. Guy never worked out a day in his life. Ate a bowl of ice cream every night. Smoked till he was 40. That was the one thing he did. My dad didn't drink alcohol. That was his big contribution, right? Because my grandpa was a big drinker. Alcoholic. And this is how alcoholic families cover up stuff. So I remember saying, like, to my mom, like, but Grandpa was an alcoholic, right? She goes, no, Grandpa was not an alcoholic. I go, what do you mean? I'm pretty sure he was always, well, he was a big drinker. He was a drinker. That's how she puts it. He was a drink. Yeah, I know. And guess who else are drinkers? Alcoholics. So my dad didn't drink at all. Never, ever did I ever see my dad drunk. Ever. But I did see him angry all the fucking time. That's the joke I used to have about my dad had two emotions, angry and not angry yet. My dad, yeah. It would have been nice if my dad got drunk once in a while. Maybe not. Maybe he would have been an angry or drunk. That'd have been bad.
Jimmy, somebody just asked in the live chat, did you ever read Joseph Campbell?
Yeah. Oh, my. Are you fucking kidding me? Yes. Joseph Campbell. I was on Joseph Campbell when I was a kid, when I was 20-something, 22, 23. I was into Joseph Campbell. I remember trying to get my family turned on to him, my parents and I'm like, hey, just Joseph Campbell, what do you think? They couldn't care less. The most incurious family. My parents didn't have a bookshelf in their entire house, right? So when I grew up in my house, we didn't have a bookshelf, but we did have a bar in our basement. I remember when I realized that I grew up, we didn't have a bookshelf in my house. There was no place, there wasn't a bookshelf. There's 12 people in the house, no bookshelf. I remember I said, Mom, how come we didn't have a bookshelf? Well, the reason was because they didn't read books. They didn't read books. My parents didn't go to college. They didn't read books. And one time someone gave my dad a book for his birthday.
I was hoping you were going to say this. And that book had a special place in your home, right, Jimmy?
Yes,
it had a special place.
So my dad got it. Somebody gave him a book. It was a biography of Mayor Richard Daley, he was the big mayor in Chicago. When I was a kid, the dad, the father, Richard Dare Senior. And he was the one who started the Chicago Democratic machine. And somebody gave him a book, my dad, a book about him. And it was called Clout. That was the name of the book. It was called Clout. And I knew whoever gave him that book didn't really know him that well, because if they knew my father, they knew he was never going to read that fucking book. My dad reads newspaper articles. He does not read books. And so my dad, guess what? My dad had a book now. No place to put it. No bookshelves. So my dad put it in the closet on the upper. He had a closet, he had a shelf on the upper where he would put, and he put it up there. And every once in a while, I would walk past his bedroom and I would see that the closet would be open a little, and I would go, "Ah, there's the book." There's the book. Yeah, I tried to get my family turned on to Joseph Campbell when I was young, when I was, like I said, when I was in my early 20s. Because I was on the Joseph Campbell. Again, I've been on this shit my whole life. So, you know, I'm no guru. I'm no enlightened dude. I just a guy who's been on a path trying to discover about why we do the things we do. And so I'm not controlled by my unconscious. Like I saw my siblings being controlled by their unconscious. So I'm not a victim to guilt that my mother instilled in us and used as control. Guilt. So like you feel like you have your own impulse. You just feel guilty about it. Oh, I want to do something for myself. And that now it's wired that you feel guilty to do something for yourself because that didn't please your mother. To the point where you don't even know what you want anymore. You have to look to your primary caregiver to see, what is it I feel? What do I feel? Because it's too scary to feel your own feelings, because sometimes when you did, your mother withdrew her love from you. And that's scary. And so it's not even a decision when you're a kid whether I want to keep being myself or whether I want to go get my mother's approval and love and security. That's not even a choice. Joseph Campbell discovered also a collective unconscious. He studied religions all over the world, primitive religions that they couldn't have ever interacted, cultures could never have interacted, and yet they all had the same metaphors in their religions. And that talks about that we have this collective unconscious to speak to our experience. We have a personal unconscious. We have a persona. You have an unconscious personal and an unconscious collective. Then you have the anima and the animus. That's the female and male shadow sides of every person. So every male has a feminine side. Every woman has a masculine side. And if you don't integrate them, it fucks you up. Like if you don't have the ability, if a man doesn't have the ability to be compassionate or sensitive, fucks you up. Things come out sideways. You punch everything. You end up like me. So that's my goal now. I feel driven like I've never been driven before. Kind of, even more so than when I was driven to get a Comedy Central special. I feel more driven now to discover my shadow and what's controlling me unconsciously, so that when things that normally would trigger me in life don't. And so I can just walk right past them. Wayne Dyer has this poem he reads someone else wrote. I should just get it. But in the poem, it's this woman talking about, I walk down the street, I see a hole, I fall in it. I walk down the street the next day, I see a hole, I try to go around it, I still fall in it. I walk down the street the next day, I see the hole, I go around it. The next day, I walk down a different street. So that's outgrowing the problem. To me, that's how I took it, that poem. It's a longer poem. I condensed it for you, gave you the Reader's Digest version. So that's about, you don't try to fix the problem, the hole, the this or that. Just, you outgrow that problem. You go down another street. I don't have to go down there. That's someone else's problem. It's that story of like when I told you my mother, when I first started comedy, would constantly cross boundaries and invade my private space. You grew up in a house with 12 people. You don't have any personal space. So I had a dresser and a closet in the basement. That was my personal space. I had a dresser in a closet in the basement. That was my personal space. And my mom would violate it. She would open the drawers and go through all and look for shit. And one time she found my dirty magazines. One time she found my cigarettes. And one time she found my comedy tape. How about when she found my dirty magazines? You know what my mother said to me? Should I tell people this? Should I tell people this is a true story? Well, it says, the next time you have the urge to see a naked woman, just ask me, and I'll take my clothes off for you. At least it will be pure. Don't do that. Don't put that image in my head.
No need.
Don't do that. Why would you do that? It's a true story. So, believe me, I used that against her many times later. Many times we would be somewhere and there'd be a woman and I'd go, hey, Mom, remember when you said... I'm getting one of those urges. But it's that story about my mom with the tape recorder. I came home, my mom said, I listened to your comedy act, right? So she was upset. She's going to use guilt and shame to try to control me because she didn't want me talking about the shit that went on in our family, right? Because she's shame-based, right? That happens in alcoholic families. Even though they weren't alcoholics, they were rageaholics and very violent, so it was very similar. And so my mom did not want me doing comedy. She was afraid, because you're only as sick as your secrets. And my mom had tons of secrets. So a lot of toxicity. And she was deathly afraid of me talking about it in the world. And so she tried to control me to get me to stop doing comedy or stop talking about that shit. And she thought it was going to work. And so I came home one day and she's holding my tape recording because I listened when she went into my drawer, crossed a boundary, went into my personal space, and listened to a private personal recording I made that wasn't for her. And she's holding it in her hand and she's like, I listened to your act, blah, 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 right? Now, normally what would you do? You would go, I have to fix this problem. I have to explain to my mother why that's wrong. I have to explain to her that it's okay for artists to go all over boundaries. I tell her about George Carlin and Lenny Bruce, and I could have tried to. Can you imagine doing that? Because that's what a lot of people do. A lot of people in that situation do that because their parents, their mother, has control over them, guilt and shame, and they're not used to individuating. So individuating is when I can be myself, do my own comedy act, however it is. Not be ashamed of it, and still feel connected to my mother. I can be myself, do something that displeases her, and still feel connected to her. And feel good about myself. That's called individuation. So at that point, I had read enough psychology books. I had read enough self-help books. I'd done enough spiritual work on myself that when I was presented with that problem with my mother, instead of trying to fix it, I had outgrown this problem, so I didn't engage in it. The first thing I realized is that my mother had crossed a boundary. So now this is her problem. This is my mother's problem of trying to control her children and crossing boundaries using shame and guilt to do it. I saw this all as my mother's problem. And I wasn't going to participate in it because it wasn't my problem. I was doing what was right and healthy. I was going out and living my life and trying to discover who I was as an artist. I'm supposed to do that. That's okay. And because of all those books I had read, I was able to do that. I was able to see. If I hadn't read any of those books or done any of that work, I would have sat down with my mom and tried to work this out. And I'd be 35, 40 years old, still sitting down with my mother, trying to explain to her why it's okay I'm a fucking comedian. And my mother tried to control my comedy her whole life. They came to see me in Vegas, did the same shit. My first half-hour Comedy Central special, my mom didn't have good things to say about it. Didn't come to see it. Of course not. Why would you come? Why would you go to Manhattan to see your son tape a television special? But what my mom did say afterwards was she didn't like some of that stuff. There's some of that stuff I didn't like. And then she thought this was a compliment. She did the thing where she goes, well, I hope somebody sees it and does something for you in show business. She's hoping that my television special will lead to something good. Do you see that's what people always do? Hey, I got a television special. Well, maybe that'll lead to something. It did. It's a television special. That's what it led to. That's a fucking victory. Over. Somebody did see me, Mom. That's what I told her. I go, someone did see me, Mom, and they gave me a special on television. That's where it leads. I remember when I got my first special on Comedy Central. My first one was called this. What did they call those? There was a name for them. They were half-hour specials. They had a name for them. I forget what they called them. Let's just say they're Comedy Central half-hour specials. And when I got one, I was in conversation somewhere. I was at some comedy event at a comedy club somewhere, at a comedy show somewhere, and there was a circle of people, and I was like, "Yeah, I go, yeah, I'm going taping my stand-up special for Comedy Central next week or something." And somebody goes, "Oh, you got one of those?" I go, "Yeah." He goes, "Who doesn't?" And I just looked at him and I said, "You don't have one, because nobody who has a Comedy Central special would ever diminish it like that. That's somebody who doesn't have one, who has to try to diminish it to soothe the pain of him not getting one." So that's what Carl Jung says, that your biggest problems in life cannot be solved. They can only be outgrown. And so that's a perfect example of that. When I outgrew the conditioning of my mother, her use of guilt and shame to control me, for whatever reason, I was able to individuate. I was able to be who I was fully, not feel ashamed or guilty, and still feel connected to my mother, and realize those were her problems that I did not have to participate in. When I say I outgrew it, I mean, like, I didn't have anxiety inside. I wasn't like, nothing. I didn't feel stress inside. I didn't feel uncomfortable, like I want to get out of here. I was completely calm inside. I saw this as my mother's problem. And I actually felt sorry for her, because she was desperately trying to control me, and that wasn't fucking happening. And I still lived at her house, and I moved out, I'm going to say weeks later. Weeks later. I should have moved out just because you're going through my shit. But then my mom tried to tighten the hammer even harder going forward after that, to control me. She was driving her fucking nuts that she couldn't control me. She was trying to control me so hard. And I just didn't play that game. And then so a couple weeks later, I was just like, "Okay, I'm going to leave. I'll see you." And I didn't talk to my mother for a year. Wasn't that hard, because I knew talking to my mother meant toxicity and guilt and shame and bullshit and control. And finally, my mother came to me to negotiate a settlement. And I said, "No problem." I realized I was reverse parenting. And I said, "Hey, you have to treat me with the same respect you want me to treat you with. That's the deal. I'll always love you, but I don't need you to be in my life if you don't respect my boundaries." And she came up, she goes, "Oh, come on." And I pushed her away, and I said, "Not kidding. I need to hear you agree to this. You need to treat me with the same amount of respect that you want me to treat you with. Okay? And that's what I'm going to give you. Whatever you give me, I'm going to give back to you. And if you can't treat me with respect, I don't need to have a relationship with you." And I was super serious. I'd already not talked to her for a year, so she knew I wasn't fucking around. She'd crashed a bowling banquet I was at. I used to be on a bowling team with my family. My family used to have a bowling family night on Saturdays, twice a month.
Mm-hmm.
And we were at my brothers and sisters. We're at a bowling banquet. This is right when I started comedy. This is right when I started comedy. And that was that. Maybe we bowled on Thursdays. I don't know. Whatever day it was, doesn't matter. And that was a big deal. And if I wasn't able to do that, I would have been in fucked up romantic relationships. I would have married the worst version of my mother, or dated the worst version of her. I never dated. Every woman I ever dated was nice. Was nice, respectful. It was always had healthy relationships in that regard. And I think that was because I was able to individuate from my mother in a healthy way. Even when my mother, when I was little, when I was in second grade and she tried to shame me, to control me, I distinctly remember going, shit, my mom's doing something, wrong. I didn't have the language of, oh, that's toxic and I don't have to partake. But I knew I could see myself sitting at the table, the kitchen table, and my mom trying to shame me, to control me, and me looking at my mom going, God damn it, she's wrong. Wow, how could I? That's too bad. Like, I didn't take it personal. I don't know fucking why. Because sometimes when she did shit, I took it personal. It's the stuff you don't see coming. It's the stuff that when you get blindsided. If I know something's coming, I can brace for it. But when it comes out of nowhere,
That's life.
That's life, though, right? So that's why I want to go into the shadows so I don't get triggered. So when things come up, it's not going to make me crazy. It's like I try to say as a comedian, I would tell other young comedians that you can't let a heckler control your show, and you can't let a heckler control you, your mood or emotion. And because if you do, now you're allowing any asswipe who walked in off the street to control your emotions. Anybody could. I give that power. No, you can't do that. And so that's the same way I feel about life. I don't want to give that power to any jagoff. How you get pissed off in traffic, stuff like that. You know what helps me in traffic? When someone cuts me off, I remember a time when I cut someone off. I'm like, yep, I've done that shit. I've gone all the way up to the front of the merge and tried to get over. I've done it. Even though this guy's pissing me off now, I'm probably pissed off at my former self because I've done this. And that helps. When you can see yourself in the person who's pissing you off, it really helps to diminish your pissed offness. Why can't I see myself in Chuck Schumer? Don't resist the resistance, Jimmy. So anyway, this is where it's at. And this guy was a motherfucker, right? This guy, as far as the gurus go, he fucked with people. He liked to. He swore all the time. This guy has a filthy mouth. That's why I also like this guy. The Neem Karoli Baba. They had a name for him. They had a nickname for him because he swore so much. I'm gonna guess it translated to swearing guru or something like that. I don't know, but it was something like that.
Or motherfucking guru.
Yeah. He'd call people pig fuckers and stuff like that. I like a guru like that. I found my guru, Ram Dass, and this guy. I love them. They're greatest. I want to meet someone who's enlightened, so I can say things to them. I have lots of things to say. The first thing I would say to Eckhart Tolle is it's not fair. It's not fair that you get to wake up because you were miserable. Because that's his story. He was so miserable. He suffered from anxiety. It would wake him up at night, anxiety. I used to have that. I would be woken up in the middle of the night by anxiety, panic attacks in the middle of the night. I had that in 1999. Boy, when I moved to LA, the pressure to succeed in show business that I put on myself wrecked me. And so Eckhart Tolle wakes up in the middle of the night one night and he's having this panic. And he says to himself, I can't live with myself anymore. That was his first thought. His second thought was, who is me and who is I? I can't live with myself? Well, if I can't live with myself, who is I and who's myself? And that gave him the space. That helped him transcend his ego. That made him see it. That gave him just enough space. He went to sleep. When he woke up, he was enlightened. When he woke up, he looked at the teapot and he could see it vibrating. He had stopped his thoughts. He had a spontaneous enlightenment, which is the same thing that happened to this guy. And regular guys like me and Ram Dass got to fucking take mushrooms and DMT. We got to meditate and hang by our fucking tits. We got to do everything just so we can get to that level of consciousness. I haven't gotten there. I got a glimpse on mushrooms. Did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just want you to briefly, the concept of a guru, like teachers that come into your life.
Right. Well, everybody can be. So Pythagoras, the great mathematician Pythagoras, people were always wanting to study with him, right? And he would tell, so when someone came and said, I'd like to study with you, he would tell them, okay, you go away for a year, come back in a year. But in this year, I'm going to send a teacher to you to teach you a lesson. It could be anybody. It could come in the form of a friend. It could come in the form of a foe or an enemy. It could be anybody. They're here. They're going to be coming to teach you a lesson. So be open for the lesson. And when you come back in a year, I'm going to ask you if you learned that lesson from the person I sent to teach it to you. Now, of course, Pythagoras would send no one. And that student now would be open to learning from every person that they met for a year. They would, what if this person's supposed to be teaching me? So you could see how that's pretty useful exercise, huh? So what was the point of me bringing that up?
I wanted to talk about gurus that they can come up.
So that was Pythagoras allowing his student to have 1 million gurus. So now everybody's was because you can learn from everyone if you're open and present. You can learn the right way to do something or the wrong way. You can learn positive or negative. You can learn how to be or not. So there's gurus like this who are enlightened, and then there's gurus like everybody else who come into your life that you can learn from. The people who are unenlightened, who you can learn by their example, good or bad. How's that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. That's really helpful. It's that idea of,
your enemies are your gurus. Your enemies are your gurus.
The conflicts that you
your
face.
Conflicts.
The obstacles.
Those are all portals for discovery, self-discovery. You know, what I try to do is see the thing that pisses me off about my enemies. I try to see that in me. So it lessens my emotional reaction to it. And the people who are my enemies are my gurus, because it gives me an opportunity to practice this over and over. And spirituality, just like anything, is a practice. You have to keep reminding yourself over and over every day. That's why they call it a practice, spiritual practice. You have to remind yourself, or you'll forget. It's just the way I know. I'm just telling you. It's hard to be grateful for your enemies. But if you can, that's when you transcend them. That's when you transcend your ego. That's when you transcend life. So I read something that about grace isn't about acquiring some positive blessing. But true grace comes from accepting a negative situation wholly. Just accepting it and being present in the moment. That's how you transcend. It all comes back to being in the moment. And if you can be in the moment, you don't have any other problems. But that's our problem. We cannot sit still and stop our thoughts. There's a poem, I'm butchering it, but all of man's problems come from his inability to sit in a room and do nothing. If you can do that, the world will reveal itself to you and throw itself at your feet. It has no choice. No, I can't do that. I can't stop my thoughts yet. I still identify with them. I chase them down the street like a dog after a squirrel. But that's where you want to get to, where you don't identify with your thoughts. You see your thoughts go by and you let them go. I don't know how to do that. These guys do it spontaneously. Guys like me have to go fucking practice our whole life, figure out how to do that shit. And Eckhart Tolle. So that's why if I ever met him, my question would be for him is, that's not fair. Why do you get to wake up and I don't? You think you had more pain than me? Because I'll fucking tell you right now, Eckhart Tolle, you did not. You did not have more physical pain than me. You did not have more emotional pain than me. You did not. So why didn't I get to wake up with all my pain? Why did you? So I not to not to do a pain off, because everyone, by the way, everyone's pain is ordinary.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, everyone has pain. Everyone's pain is ordinary. Your pain is ordinary. You think your pain is special? It's not. I'll show you 10 motherfuckers right now in worse pain than you. That's the human condition. All suffering is caused by desire, as the Buddha said. And then you fall into the trap of desiring desirelessness. That's when you want to punch a Buddhist. What? Oh, you are desiring desirelessness. Come here. Fucking come here. That's how
You're
far.
desiring not to desire.
Yes.
Sorry, that's too much.
So that's but anyway. So that would be, so a lot of stand-up comedy is shadow work, actually. A lot of comedians, when they get up, they talk about their dark side, and then people connect with them, because we all have a dark side. And that's me just now doing that. That's my dark side. I want to fucking punch that. I want to punch the Buddhist. I get angry at things I don't understand. That's my shadow. Hey, everybody, this is the part where I tell you where all our live shows are, but there aren't any. And then this is why I tell you to join our premium program and get extra content, but nobody's got a fucking job. So just enjoy the video.